My father did not raise his voice when he said it. He did not need to. The room was already quiet enough to hear the clock, over the fireplace, ticking like a countdown. Sign the transfer, he said calmly, sliding the folder across the table. All $19,600,000 to your sister. I stared at the paper, the names, the numbers, the certainty in his face. I am not signing, I said. That is when my mother stood up. So fast her chair scraped the floor. Her hand came out of nowhere. Smack. You do not have a choice, she screamed. The heat from my mother's palm stayed on my face, but I did not give her the satisfaction of a flinch. I did not cry. I did not ask why. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I stood up with a precision they had not seen before, the kind of posture that comes from years of standing on scaffolding while they stood in ballrooms. I checked my watch. It was 11:51 p.m. By the time I reached my car, the shock had already hardened into a balance sheet. I drove away from the red brick mansion without looking back, the scent of their expensive tea still clinging to my hair like a dying legacy. I was not just leaving a room, I was exiting a contract I never signed. I arrived at my studio 10 minutes later. The silence there was different, it was mine. I opened my laptop and felt the hum of the processor against my fingertips. This was not a breakdown, it was accounting. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for 30 years, and it was time to audit the books. I logged into the firm's archival server, the digital vault, holding every blueprint, every restoration secret, and every Master Mason certification required for our $19,600,000 state contract. Taylor thought she was the architect of this empire because she was the face of the social media accounts. She did not realize she was just the paint on a structure I had built, stone by stone. I pulled up the administrative permissions. My mother and father had spent years treating my compassion like a luxury they could overdraft without limit. They saw me as a resource, a reliable gear, in a machine that only ever polished Taylor's image. While Taylor was being handed the keys to a luxury sport utility vehicle, I was being told to take the subway to save the firm's overhead. While they threw thousands into sorority fees and designer wardrobes for the golden child, I was quietly paying the firm's back taxes to keep us from foreclosure. I had spent 3 years paying $18,000 a year just to keep the lights on in a building they thought they owned. At 12 o'clock sharp, I moved the cursor over the archival kill switch. I had installed this safeguard years ago, an old habit from a grandmother who taught me that trust is a feeling, but a signature is a fact. I clicked deactivate. Seconds later, the firm's primary servers went dark. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Every blueprint for the Boston Historical Preservation Project was now encrypted behind a code only I possessed. I had been a subscription they had enjoyed for free, and now the bill was due. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of regret. But there was only clarity. They were not shocked by what they had done to me. They were only going to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise. The kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. Calm, factual, and lethal. The transition was complete by 12:03 a.m. The architect of their comfort was gone, and the foundation they stood on was already beginning to crumble. As I sat in the blue light of my monitor, I felt the phantom sting on my cheek finally begin to fade, replaced by a cold, familiar clarity. For 30 years, I lived in a house that felt like a blueprint with a missing room me. While Taylor slept in the master suite, with the balcony overlooking the garden, I was tucked into the converted storage space under the service stairs. They called it efficient and cozy. But even as a child, I knew it was a placeholder for a person they did not really want to see. Everything in that house was a performance of status, but I was the only one looking at the load-bearing walls. I remember being 12 and watching my father boast about the unbreakable legacy of the firm, while I sat on the floor, unnoticed, tracing the hairline fractures in the crown molding of the dining room. I was not just a quiet girl. I was a survivor, wearing an invisible chain. People often mistake a victim's silence for weakness, or a lack of spirit, but they do not see the strategic observation happening behind the eyes. I was living in a prison without bars, a structure of emotional neglect where the rules were designed to keep me small so Taylor could appear grand. But these invisible chains became my training ground. Because I was never invited to the front of the stage, I learned to map the exits. I spent 3 decades observing every crack in their foundation and every lie in their ledgers. I learned that when you are the one the family assumes will always be fine, you become the only one who actually knows how to survive when the lights go out. My grandmother, Margaret, was the only one who saw the sentinel in the shadow. She was a woman who spoke in facts, not feelings. I can still hear the rasp of her voice at her kitchen table, the air thick with the scent of Earl Grey tea and old parchment. She would slide a stack of accounts toward me and say, "Olivia, do not look at the totals they want you to see. Look at the gaps. Some things are clearer to people who are not desperate for a round of applause." She was right. Favoritism is a blinding light for the one who receives it, but for the one left in the dark, it provides a perfect view of the truth. I spent my 20s earning the Master Mason certifications they dismissed as manual labor, while Taylor was busy curating an image of success that did not exist. I did the hard math for $19,600,000 worth of state contracts, while my mother complained that my navy dresses did not pop enough for the firm's holiday photos. I realized tonight that I do not owe them my silence anymore. I had been the load-bearing wall of this family for my entire life, holding up a roof that only sheltered them. But a wall can also be a barricade. My compassion had been a financial resource they overdrafted for years, believing the line of credit was infinite. Now, I was looking at the balance sheet, and they were in the red. The foundation was ready to crack, and for the first time in 30 years, I was not going to be the one to patch it. I was going to let it fall. The silence of my studio was broken by the rhythmic vibration of my phone against the glass desk. It was not an apology. It was a digital siege. Taylor's texts arrived like rapid-fire litigation, each one more desperate than the last. Traitor, thief, jealous failure. I did not answer a single one. I went back to my ledger. My silence was a boundary they did not know how to navigate a blank space in a contract they were used to rewriting at my expense. By one, men, my mother, Stephanie, had moved the battle to the court of public opinion. She posted a long, rambling plea on a Boston Historical Society forum, painting a picture of a heartbroken family dealing with a mentally fragile daughter. She claimed I had sabotaged a $19,600,000 project out of spite. She even used my doctorate in engineering as a symptom of my supposed instability, suggesting that my focus on old stones had finally broken my grip on reality. To her, a daughter who studied instead of performing was a liability to be managed, not a professional to be respected. Taylor did not wait for the servers to reboot. She contacted our biggest competitor before dawn, trying to outsource the restoration work before the state board noticed the digital blackout. She thought that because she had the title of vice president on her business card, she held the authority. She did not realize that in the world of high-stakes preservation, the title is just the wallpaper, but the certification is the structural steel. By morning, the roadblock was absolute. The competitor's lawyers had reviewed the state contract for the $19,600,000 preservation. It was a rigid, uncompromising document that required a master mason on site for every phase of the restoration. There were only 4 people in the entire state with that level of certification, and I was the only one on our firm's payroll. Taylor had spent years curating a facade of competence, but now the paint was peeling in the harsh light of a Monday morning. She could not hire her way out of this gap in her knowledge. The firm's elite status was a rental she could no longer afford because the owner, me, had just terminated the lease. My compassion had been the silent lubricant in their gears for 3 decades, and now that I had drained it, the whole machine was starting to smoke. The louder they screamed about my betrayal, the more I realized their power was just a performance, and I had finally stopped paying for the tickets. I met with my attorney, Grace, at 10 a.m. sharp. She did not offer sympathy. She offered a thick manila folder filled with audit results. This was the professional escalation I had been preparing for while they were busy posting on social forums. Grace had spent 48 hours digging into my grandmother's historical preservation trust, the $19,600,000 engine that powered our family name. What she found was not just favoritism, it was a felony. Grace slid a document across the desk, highlighting 3 specific transactions. Olivia, look at these consultant signatures, she said, confirming trust withdrawals totaling $2,300,000. I stared at the ink. It looked like my handwriting. It had the same precise slant, the same technical flourish, but I had been on a research site in Italy when these papers were dated. It was a forgery. Gary and Stephanie had not just been unkind, they were criminals. My own parents had been skimming from the preservation fund for years to maintain a status they could not earn. $2,300,000 of theft disguised as family administration. In that moment, I realized that their power was an illusion, a high-end rental they could not afford without my stolen credit. This was the absolute embodiment of the illusion of the empty wallet. They spent decades looking down on me from a pedestal I was unknowingly financing. Their elite status, their memberships at the country club, and even Taylor's designer wardrobe were all built on a foundation of stolen capital. They were not wealthy. They were just good at pretending while someone else did the math. My parents were so obsessed with the image of success that they sacrificed the substance of it. When you build a house on a lie, you have to keep stealing more bricks just to keep the roof from caving in. I looked at the forgery and felt a profound sense of clarity. My compassion had been the luxury they overdrafted, but this was the hard stop. Love had been a contract where I was the only one providing the collateral. Now I realized it had been a subscription where I was footing the bill for people who did not even like the person providing the service. This was not a family breakdown. It was a liquidation. Grace leaned back, her eyes sharp. They have been living on a line of credit they stole from your future, she said. My family had spent 30 years performing a life they did not own. Their power was not internal. It was a costume they bought with forged checks. They thought they were better than me because they held the champagne flutes, while I held the blueprints. But they forgot that I was the one who owned the cellar. When the money stops, the character is all that is left. And in that room, their character was a void. They were fragile because their status was a rental, and the landlord was done being ignored. I looked at Grace and nodded. Draft the formal notice, I said. Give them 30 days to initiate a repayment plan for the $2,300,000 before we file criminal charges. I was not just reclaiming my money, I was auditing their souls. The Boston Society forum post from my mother now seemed pathetic. A desperate attempt to discredit the only person who knew the wallet was empty. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt the cold, efficient satisfaction of an architect, watching a structurally unsound building finally begin to collapse under its own weight. The rain was slicking the cobblestones outside my studio when the doorbell finally rang. I did not rush to answer it. I let the sound echo through the high ceilings, a persistent reminder that the world they had built was finally demanding an answer they did not have. When I finally opened the door, they looked reduced. Gary's suit was wrinkled, and Stephanie's eyes were rimmed with the kind of red that does not come from grief, but from the sharp, stinging panic of a cornered animal. Taylor stood behind them, her designer coat soaked through, looking less like a social media star and more like the hollow shell she had always been. I stood behind my drafting table and did not offer them a chair. For 30 years, I had taken the seat at the edge of the room. Near the wall, the invisible girl who was expected to blend into the wallpaper while Taylor took the center stage. Now, they were in my space, and I was the one holding the structural steel. Gary tried the old voice, the authoritative tone that had commanded my silence for 3 decades. Olivia, this has gone too far, he said, trying to square his shoulders. We are a family, and your sister has a deadline. The state audit for the Historical Preservation Project is in 48 hours, and the board is demanding your Master Mason's signature on the certifications. You are sabotaging a $19,600,000 legacy. I looked at the folder. Gary was holding the same one he had pushed across the oak table in the red brick mansion days earlier. Sign the affidavit. Olivia, Stephanie pleaded, her voice cracking. We are losing the house. We are losing everything. Authority is not a performance, Gary. I said calmly. It is a fact. I reached into my bag and pulled out the charcoal grey fireproof folder. I did not slam it. I slid it across the glass desk with clinical precision. It stopped exactly in front of him, a mirror of the moment that was supposed to have broken me. Taylor grabbed it first. Her hands were shaking so hard she nearly tore the metal clasp. Inside were not apologies. They were the documented bank records for the $2,300,000 you skimmed. While I was finishing my master masonry in Europe, you acted as interim trustees and used that window to forge my signature on shadow accounts. You thought I would never look at the foundation, but you forgot. I am a mason. I always check the foundation before I trust the walls. The room went as silent as the stones I restored for a living. Stephanie's face drained of colour until she looked like a gargoyle on a crumbling cathedral. Then I delivered the final blow. I flipped to the successor authority clause in Margaret's executed will. "Ma'am," I said, looking my mother directly in the eye, "do you know who really holds decision-making authority over every cent of this $19,600,000 estate?" Gary's jaw tightened, but the roar was gone. "We are the parents," he whispered weakly. "It is a family business." The $19,600,000 is held in a protected historical trust established by Grandmother Margaret. As the sole executor and the only person holding the required dual certification in engineering and master masonry, the state treasury will not release a single cent without my verified signature. You didn't just try to steal my career. You tried to break into a legal fortress you don't have the keys to. My attorney already tried to tell you, Gary. It is not, I said. I am the sole executor. I have been for years. You did not invite me to that meeting to talk. You invited me to comply with a lie you were already living. But I was never the backup plan. I was the safeguard Margaret put in place to keep you from burning it all down for a round of applause. Taylor looked at me, tears ruining the makeup that had been her only real contribution to our legacy. Please, Olivia, help us. I walked to the door and opened it. The cold Boston air felt cleaner than the air in that room. I already told you, I said, my voice as level as a foundation stone. I am not signing. Goodbye, Gary. Goodbye, Stephanie. I watched them walk back out into the rain, reduced and silenced, while I stayed behind the walls I had built myself. The liquidation did not feel like a win. It felt like a restoration. The state audit arrived, and without my Master Mason signature on their fraudulent certifications, the firm's contracts were revoked. Gary and Stephanie were forced to sell the red brick mansion, the cars, and the jewelry collection my mother had used as armor against her own insignificance. They moved into a small apartment near the highway, reduced to the reality of their own limited means. Taylor's marriage ended when the foundation of her architect-heiress persona was revealed to be nothing but stolen blueprints. I did not gloat. I simply updated the ledger. I used the $19,600,000 to build something that would last longer than their vanity. I founded the Margaret Vocational School for Historic Restoration, a place where kids who grew up in the shadows, kids like I was, could learn the trade of making old things strong again. We restored a neighborhood community center in a part of Boston my parents never would have visited. Watching those young masons handle a chisel for the first time gave me a level of satisfaction that $19 million in a bank account never could. This was the justice of the seed sower. True revenge is not the destruction of your enemies. It is building a legacy so beautiful that their cruelty becomes entirely irrelevant. Today, I stand on the scaffolding of a centuries-old cathedral, the cold wind of Boston, hitting my face, reminding me that I am real. I am no longer the invisible girl under the stairs. I am the architect of my own peace. Gary called me last week from a burner phone, his voice shaky and small, asking for a meeting. I waited in the silence, then hung up. I did not need his apology to be whole, and I did not need his permission to exist. My compassion is no longer a subscription he can use. It is a resource I guard for those who deserve it. To those of you listening who have spent your lives being the load-bearing wall for a family that refuses to see you, your boundaries are not betrayal. Your clarity is not cruelty. You do not owe your silence to those who use it to keep themselves comfortable. You have the right to take your bricks and build your own house. It takes courage to cut the chain, but once you do, the view from the top is breathtaking. If you have ever had to reclaim your worth from the ashes of someone else's favoritism, subscribe and share your journey. This is a community for the invisible ones who decided it was finally time to be seen. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.